Good morning. Beautiful November fall Sunday morning. Just a little Christmas in the air. I didn't say Christmas, I said crispness. But Christmas is coming. All right, so we are, as we was talking about, been studying the book of Joshua. This is class number 9 out of 11. So we will be wrapping this up at the end of November. And so I got to ask the question. Last week, Terry answered it. Who can tell me what Joshua means? Bernadine got it. Yahweh is salvation. Okay. And we've been walking through the structure of Joshua, talking about the transition to him as a leader, the preparation for the Israelite people as they prepared to take the promised land that God had given them as part of the covenant, all the way back to Abraham. And we're in the last week of this middle section of conquering the enemy. And we're going to talk a little bit about dividing the spoils as well in today's class. And so, again, to kind of set up where we have been, where we're at, you can see here, we've traveled across the Jordan, had some interactions with Jericho, Ai, Gibeon, and that's kind of where we left off last week. And so in chapter 9, we saw the Gibeon people develop a ruse. And who can tell me what some of the specific things that the Gibeonite people did to try and trick Joshua and the Israelites? What did they do? Yes, so cracked wineskins, worn out sandals. What did their bread look like? Moldy. So they had given this illusion or this perception that they had come from a faraway distance. And they were strategic in how they went about it. And what did the Israelites do? What did Joshua and the elders do when they saw these people with these cracked wineskins and worn out sandals? They assumed. They inspected them, did some things, asked some questions, and assumed, no, this looks good on the face value. What did they not do? Inquire of God. Okay, so we see again this up and down, this cycle that tends to happen with the Israelites, and we've seen it now a couple times here in Joshua, where again, if God is not a part of their decision making, God is not a part of the activities they're involved with, things go sideways, right? And so the elders and Joshua ultimately dictate a punishment to the Gibeonite people for this deception, and they forced him to be woodcutters and water carriers for the house of God. Ultimately, they confess a little bit later, and we see in later parts of the Old Testament that the Gibeonite people ultimately continue to be a part of the Israelites, and they have a role in the future of the Israelite people and the story of God's people. Okay, so then we jumped into chapter 10, and we see, again, this treaty that was made with the Gibeonites has some strings attached to it. Which means not only do the Israelites have to be nice to them, but they also have to protect them. So we meet 5 kings who form a coalition, and these are the principal cities in the area, and they attack the Gibeonites. And the first thing that happens, again, right after this treaty is like, hey, Joshua, we're under attack right now. Can you come help us? And again, we have the option here. Joshua can choose to act as he chooses, but he decides he's going to go all in here. He's going to, again, honor and hold himself and the Israelite people to the high standard that God has set here, sends his best men in to help defend them. And we see God play a major role here. A couple things happen. The first one is that during this battle, Joshua does what to God? What's he do? He prays to God. And he asks him, says, can you make this sun stand still? I need a little more time. The work is not done here. I need time to make sure I can finish this battle so that the people don't escape into all these other cities under the ruse of darkness, right? And we see in Scripture, it says, and God listened to a human and caused the sun to stand still. And there's not been a day like it before or since then. And then the other part that we also see here is part of this battle. Does God have a role in the battle itself? Do you remember what happened in this battle? What came down from the sky? Hail, not just rain, hail. So Joshua and the Israelites are chasing this army, and Scripture says more people died that day from the hail from the sky than they did by the sword of the Israelites. Which again, a couple things to point out. Even though we may think that we're strong and we've got the sword, and even with God with us, the reality is God is the one that is powerful here, and He is going to do more than we can imagine. We also saw, again, that God had gone on before them and confused the king so that they could not organize, they couldn't strategize, they couldn't put together this army in a way that was going to be able to stand up against them. And we made some comparisons to how God goes on before us in many of the things that we have in our lives today. Even though we may not see it, God has gone on before us and is preparing that way for us. We may not know what that looks like. It may have some bumps in it and may have some turns in it. But that God is with us as He goes through there. Okay, so we're going to pick up now in Joshua chapters 10 through 12. And this is kind of the last little bit of chapters until the tail end, where we're going to spend some detail going through the way that we have before in terms of kind of verse by verse and going through the story. And then we're going to pick up a little bit of speed here in the second half. Okay, so we're going to pick up in the second half of chapter 10. And we've seen up to this point, again, momentum now of the people of Israel possessing the land. They've come across, they've cut off the center, and now we're going to see them start to go south and take on the area here in the southern part of the Canaan land. Okay, so they've come out of Gibeon, and we're going to pick up, and they're going to be in this city of Makkedah here in chapter 10, the second half. Okay, so we're going to see this completion of the account as we go through chapter 10 and 12. We're going to start in the south, we're going to work our way up, and then we're going to finish the whole journey out here in these two chapters. And so again, rapid succession is the way that really the scripture is set up here. We see multiple battles happen in a really, really quick way. So we're going to pick up in chapter 10, verse 29 here. Actually 28, sorry. That day Joshua took Makkedah. He put the city and its king to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it. He left no survivors. He did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him moved on from Makkedah to Libnah and attacked it. The Lord also gave that city and its king to Israel's hand. The city and everyone in it Joshua put to the sword. He left no survivors there. And he did, to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved from Libnah to Lachish, and he took up positions against it and attacked it. And the Lord gave Lachish into Israel's hands, and Joshua took it on the second day. The city and everyone in it he put to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. Meanwhile, Horam, king of Gezer, had come up to help Lachish, but Joshua defeated him and his army until no survivors were left. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him moved on from Lachish to Eglon, and they took up positions against it and attacked it. They captured it, and that same day put it to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it, just as they had done to Lachish. Okay, so we'll pause there. So we see here, Joshua led this fighting men into Libnah and attacked it. And this wasn't one of the cities that was part of the coalition of the 5 kings that we had seen in the previous part of the chapter. But the whole of Canaan had been promised to Joshua and the Israelites, right? So we see it's their duty to conquer each of these cities in the name of the Lord. That was the command that was given to Moses. That's the command that was given to Joshua. And so again, they're following through with that command. And as we see with Jericho and Makkedah, Joshua devoted the city to the Lord, and he killed every living inhabitant in it, as was the command. Right? Again, things of the cities were devoted to evil and other things that they needed to be destroyed in order for God's command to be fulfilled. And Lachish is mentioned as one of the largest cities in the south part of Canaan. It was a provincial city for Egypt for almost 300 years. And it was well fortified, probably similar to what we saw with Jericho. And again, also on top of a steep hill. But this the king of Lachish had been executed at Makeda with all the battles that had happened in that coalition. He was one of those kings. And so the city didn't have a king at this time, we believe. But it's still, Scripture says it took 2 days for them to conquer the city of Lachish, because soldiers from Gezer had come up and joined the fight. So we had seen them again trying to support each other, but it was no use, all right? The Israelites had joined forces, and they ended up ultimately destroying that city, like I said, in 2 days. And then west of that was Eglon, which is about 7 miles away. It was captured on the same day. So again, we see that momentum now. The Israelites are cooking, one city to the other. Boom, they make a march, they go to the next city, same day, take it out. And so we're seeing now, again, that maybe potentially little resistance is happening as armies are starting to form coalitions. We're wiping out smaller parts here, and then the Israelites are moving at a much more quickly pace. So continuing, we see in chapter 10, verse 36, it says, "Then Joshua and all of Israel went up from Eglon to Hebron and attacked it. And they took the city and put it to the sword. Together with its king, its villages, and everyone in it, they left no survivors. Just as at Eglon, they totally destroyed it and everyone in it. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him turned around and attacked Debir. They took the city, its king, and its villages and put it to the sword, and everyone in it they totally destroyed. Left no survivors. They did to Debir and his king as they had done to Libnah and its king to Hebron. And so Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills, the mountain slopes together with all their kings, and he left no survivors. Totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. Joshua subdued them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza, and from the whole region of Goshen to Gibeon. All these kings and their lands Joshua conquered in one campaign, because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned with Israel to the camp at Gilgal." Okay, so Gilgal, again, remember, is in the middle section of the country, or the land. So they were on this conquest journey as they made their way down. And this is basically telling the historical information of the conquest that happened in the south. Hebron's mentioned in verse 36. And this is located about 3,000 feet above sea level. So it was literally an uphill battle for the Israelites. But Hebron's not just important here in terms of Joshua. Hebron actually has historical significance in Scripture further on, and actually in the history as well. We find that Abraham actually lived on the outskirts of the city for a long time. Okay? And many Old Testament prominent figures are buried outside of the city. People like Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. Right? So this was probably pretty important for the Israelite people to come into this land and to make this city part of their home, right? Just from a significance of historical, but also from a family perspective, right? But that's not the focal point. The focal point that we see here is that the central storyline that we see is that God says to Joshua in chapter 1, verse 3, "I will give you every place where you set foot." And so we see the repetition here, and it's a little bit, monotonous as we read through it. They went from this city and they conquered it and they did to their king and they took out everybody. And then they go to the next city and they do the exact same thing. But it's important that we understand, again, the need for that to be understood and described in that detail, because this is the fulfillment, again, of what God has said. I am going to give you this promise. And we're seeing that play out in detail. All right, so we again see similar summaries of small battles, killed all the people, also probably took livestock as part of their plunder, and part of God's blessing, as we saw that carried on. And so to this point, how many defeats have we seen for the Israelite people in terms of actual battles up to this point? Who can tell me? Just one, right? Where was that at? You remember? Ai, right? So we see they suffered that one loss through this whole battle as they've conquered this whole thing. And I can tell you, in most historical military objectives, it's very rare to only have one issue or one situation where you were unsuccessful in your battle, right? So we see that play out here. Again, the fact that when God is with them, no one can stand against them. And so they return back now to their home base in Gilgal. And again, in the same way that we think about our lives here, whatever battles we may have in life, we can take comfort in knowing that we're not fighting them alone. Right? God is with us. He goes on before us, and we should take comfort in that. We should absolutely take comfort to that. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 and 4 says, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. For the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds." Ai, Jericho, Hebron, Lachish, the most fortified cities in the world at this time, and they go down in a matter of days. We have the power to demolish strongholds when God is with us. Okay, so now, just to kind of, again, talk about where we're at. We came down, Gilgal was their home base. They made ways through here, and you can see they're kind of zigzagging as they come and take around all of this land. And specifically, at the tail end of the scripture, it says that they had conquered the land basically from Hazar Adar and Kadesh up to Gaza and all the way across. So we see, again, even though every one of those battles isn't listed out, these are the ones that are called out in Scripture, it mentions specifically they've accomplished now that entire southern land. Okay? So we've seen the central and we've seen the southern. So now let's talk about the north. So we're going to flip over to chapter 11 now. All right, so 1 through 6 says, "When the Jabin, the king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent word to Joab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Ashkaf, and to the northern kings who were in the mountains, in the Arabah south of Kinnereth, in the western foothills, in the Naphthys door of the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, to the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Jebusites in the hill country, and to the Hivites below Hermon, in the region of Mizpah. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots and a huge army as numerous as the sand and the seashore. All these kings joined together forces that made camp together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, 'Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them slain over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots.'" All right, so now we see the same situation developing. The word about the Israelites and the power of God is doing what? It's spreading. And what kind of reaction does that word spreading have? People are scared. We see this news spread north, and Jabin says, "Man, I got to do something here, or we're going to be just like these other cities." So what does he do? Every last king, city, person that's out there, he brings them all together. Okay, now what is the description of how big this army was? What does it say? Numerous as what? Now, where have we heard that before? Abraham. God says to Abraham, "I am going to make the people of Israel as numerous as the sand on the seashore." Okay, so just in terms of context, that's a lot of sand. If you think about all that's out there, right? I love the visualization of that, especially when you think about these armies. Not only does it mention how big the army is, what else does it say they have? Horses and chariots. We haven't seen that yet. We've seen big fortresses, but we've not seen weapons and instruments of war in the same way. And we see, again, a similar statement that God makes in the same way that he promised. Oh, sorry, that way I already said that one in Genesis. My apologies. So, does anybody in here, how many people think that this army, with as numerous people as sand and seashore, have a shot against the Israelites? I got a lot of laughs, right? It's very clear that we're getting ready to see God work in an amazing way. So the waters of Merom is about 75 miles from Gilgal. So if I go back here for just a second, right, Gilgal's down here, and the waters of Merom are all the way up here, okay? So about 75 miles. So how do you think Joshua was feeling on this trip where God has said, I'm with you, go make this journey? 75 miles is probably a couple days, again, to get up there. What kind of emotion do you think Joshua's having? You think he's confident? You think he's nervous? Anybody? I would assume so as well. We don't know, right? It's probably a little twinkle in the back of his mind around, did anybody do anything wrong here, right? But I think he's probably got a lot of confidence. And especially when you hear the Lord say, how long is it going to take for the Israelites to take these people? 24 hours. 24 hours. I think it's also important here we should note that the Lord tells Joshua after he wins, what is he supposed to do with these horses and these chariots? I think it's really an interesting point. Now, what good is a hamstringed horse? It's not. I think that's the point. Think about that for just a second. Imagine the Israelites come in, take this whole army, this whole city, and then they end up with a bunch of horses and chariots. What do you think they're going to do? I'll come to you in just a second, Charles. What do you think they're going to do? Do you think they're going to be confident in these horses and these chariots and these weapons of war, or do you think they're going to be confident in God? I think they're probably going to put their faith in these weapons of war, and it's going to be a stumbling block for them. So I think it's really astute that God says to them, hamstring these horses and burn these chariots, because he takes that temptation away from them. Okay? Charles, you have something?
I was wondering if you could possibly explain what that word means in this particular case, hamstring.
Yeah, so a horse, just like humans, a hamstring runs on the back of the leg. And so horse's main goal is to run real fast. So if anybody ever pulled a hamstring? I have. It's really hard to run because that is the major part of your muscle that pulls your leg back. Actually, I think it pulls it back. Adam probably knows better than I do.
It's the breaking force when your foot strikes the gravel.
Yeah. So if a horse's hamstring is cut, it's most likely not going to come back together, and they're going to not be able to run. So then your horse is useless, basically. Okay? It's a good question. All right? So it's all about trust. It's all about relying on God, understanding that he's committed this to them. All right, so let's pick up here 7 to 15. So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them. And the Lord gave them into the hands of Israel, and they defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Miseroth, to Maim, and the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. And at the time Joshua turned back and captured Hazor and put its king to the sword. Again, remember, Hazor had been the head of all these kingdoms. Everyone in it they put to the sword, and they totally destroyed them, not sparing anyone that had breathed, and he burned Hazor itself. Joshua took all these royal cities and their kings and put them to the sword. He totally destroyed them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. Yet Israel did not burn any of the cities built on their mounds except Hazor, which Joshua burned. The Israelites carried off for themselves all the plunder and the livestock of the cities, but all the people they put to the sword until they completely destroyed them, not sparing anyone that breathed. As the Lord commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and Joshua did it. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Okay, so here we see, right, it was a good try. Good try by this massive army, but they were unsuccessful. The Israelites destroyed them in 24 hours. And again, we see God gives the command, the Israelites hamstring the horses. We also see Joshua fulfill the command that had been passed down around destroying every living thing in Canaan. And so now, even with superior weapons, we can see that God, again, is going to come through. His power overcomes things of this world. And we see the victory. In the last scenes of the battle, Hazor is captured. Again, Jabin was the guy that started this whole alliance. And we see that city get burned. It was the only one to the north that specifically called out as being burned. I think it's because that's probably where the coalition started, right, to make a point. And then they continued the rest of the north. And we see that the servant of the Lord commanded everything. Okay, so then let's go down here to verse 23. So Joshua took the entire land, just as Moses had directed Moses. Just as the Lord had directed Moses. And he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions, and the land had rest from war. So again, I think it's really important here to see now this is the conclusion of the conquest. Joshua had gone through, and it's believed that this entire campaign could have taken up to 7 years to complete. Not too surprising, right? 7 is kind of the number of completion in the Bible, right? And then we see, similarly what has laid out in other parts of Scripture, on the 7th, we see rest. Rest doesn't mean comfort here, though, right? God's not saying go be comfortable. Because what happens when you get comfortable? Anybody? You're vulnerable. You get lazy. And we've seen when that happens in the Israelites, bad things happen. So rest here is specifically a pausing to remember, I think, the faithfulness from God. Faithfulness through this entire journey, a faithfulness all the way back through Moses, through Abraham, that he's going to give this land and everyone in it to the Israelites. And it's this idea of remembering. But don't lose your edge. Don't get comfortable. Rely on God. Rely on that connection. And understand that he's the one where the strength comes from. Okay? So just to kind of wrap up, this was kind of where we saw things happen. Joshua and the people travel up to Waters of Merom, and then we see him basically go to Hazor. Then he goes to each of these different cities and makes sure that he's captured all the people up here. And it specifically says that the army, the large army, included people all the way down here, even to Gibeon, who were part of the I think the Hivites is what they were a part of. And everybody was up here. So they conquered everyone up in the distance, all the way up to the north. So, pause here for just a second. What are some of God's promises that require me to combine faith with action? What are some of the promises that require me to combine faith with action? Think about that one, okay? What battle has the Lord fought for me recently? And what was the outcome? If you're not looking back on your life and thinking through these things, a lot of times we're in the middle of the midst of chaos and confusion and different things that are going on in our lives. Maybe it's just stress. It's hard in that moment to focus on the fact that God is working. That's part of the reason why, again, I think he wants that relationship to stay connected. But hindsight is 20/20. So looking back and seeing where God carried you through, sometimes it's helpful, or situations that other people have gone through. And thinking about those battles. Sometimes those battles are really small. Sometimes they're bigger. Sometimes they're massive and they consume your whole life, right? But looking back and thinking about our relationship, how God helped us through that, or maybe he didn't because maybe we weren't as connected as we should have been. Okay? Number 3, when I'm striving to do something good, do I rely more on my own capabilities, like horses and chariots, or on God's strength? What if I am striving to do his will? How does that look? Does it look differently? If I'm striving to do his will, the outcomes are probably looking differently. Number 4, what ways has your obedience to God resulted in blessings in your life? Okay? Blessings can look like a lot of different things. Especially when you look at them in hindsight, right? You may not have thought this was the right decision, or this is the right place to go, or the right people or persons to be around. But obedience to God, in many cases, can cause those things to become blessings that you may have not anticipated in that moment. Okay? I think these are some important points to think as we go through now. Joshua has accomplished the mission that God set out. And I think about the mission that we've been given. Are we ever going to be finished with it? No. But we've been given a mission, go out in all the nations, spreading the gospel and baptizing, making disciples. That starts every day when I get out of bed. Am I connected to God? How am I staying connected? Am I looking for those things where God has gone on before me? Okay? All right, so we're going to transition now. This is where we pick up a little speed. Right? We're not going to read all chapter 13 through 21. Chapters 13 through 21, though, is the division of the land amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. You can see this little picture here. That's actually each of the symbols and the names of the 12 tribes. We did some trivia to see who could name all those tribes. It's a bit of a fun challenge. But we're going to see here how the promised land was divided. We're going to see Caleb again. We're going to talk about him and his role. And we're going to see the purpose and provisions of cities of refuge. And we're going to look for instances where God distributes his blessings to the people and offers his protection over their lives. All right? So chapter 13 here is, in brief, a couple of things. So after years of war and conquest, the land of Canaan has finally come under the control of God's chosen people. Yet there's still vast areas of land to be conquered. It's listed in 1-7, okay, verses 1-7 of chapter 13. In the land east of the Jordan River, which is over here, right? The Jordan runs top to bottom between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. It's already been allocated to Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh, right? We referred to those earlier on here as the Transjordan tribe. They're on the other side of the Jordan. And that's, again, was given to them by Moses before the Israelites crossed over. And we see the allocation of that land get detailed here in verses 8 through 33, all right? But this is what it's ultimately going to look like when everything is cut up to all the individual groups. So we're going to understand how that process happens here in just a second. But before we do that, we're going to read here in chapter 14. We're going to talk about Caleb. Okay, so if you can flip over to chapter 14. Verses 1 through 5 here, it talks about how the land is split up. So this is the process. So now these are the areas the Israelites received as an inheritance in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the head of the head of the tribal clans of Israel allotted to them. Their inheritances were assigned by lot to the 9.5 tribes, as the Lord had commanded through Moses. Moses had granted the 2.5 tribes their inheritance east of the Jordan, but had not granted the Levites an inheritance amongst the rest. For Joseph's descendants had become 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Levites received no share of the land, but only towns to live in, with pasture land for their flocks and herds, so that the Israelites divided the land just as the Lord had commanded Moses. All right, so we see here a very specific process. Eleazar, the son of Aaron, was the high priest at the time during the conquest, and he has a very prominent role here in this distribution. All right, so he's going to act as God's hands here to some extent. But I also think it's interesting if you notice in verse 1, whenever Eleazar and Joshua are mentioned together, Eleazar's name is always listed first, again, signifying the prominent role of God in the process, and then Joshua after that as the leader of the Israelite people. Okay? And we see that the inheritances are assigned by casting of lots. We talked about that earlier on. And the importance of that is it eliminates any favoritism. Right? I'm the youngest of 4. I can tell you what, my brother sure thought I got a lot of favoritism, but I thought the opposite. Right? And so there's always he got this, and this wasn't fair, and this wasn't even. That's taken out of the equation here by God by casting lots, because it becomes God's decision who gets what land. Right? And so there's a mention of the fact that the Levites were to receive no inheritance. Who knows why the Levites don't get inheritance? What is their role going to be going forward? Priests, right? So, is this detailed again in Moses' instructions in Numbers 35? They were the priestly tribe. They were maintained their presence throughout all of the promised land. They want to be scattered and sprinkled amongst the people. Again, the same reason. To make sure that there is a priest with all these people to keep the focus on God, to be able to do all the sacrifices and all the things that are necessary to maintain that covenant with the Lord. All right? So they're given towns and pasture lands throughout the region, but they are amongst all the other tribes. And I think also it's interesting here, at the end of chapter 14 is a fulfillment of the promise to Moses. So let's look of Moses to Caleb back in Numbers. So let's go down here to 10 through 12. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years. This is Caleb talking. Since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out, and I'm as vigorous to go into battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. So we see Caleb here. And who was Caleb? Just real quick. One of the spies. So there were two spies that came out of the original looking into the land. One of them was Joshua, and one of them was, there was 12. But there's one Joshua and one Caleb were the two that came back with good reports. Here we see Joshua become the leader of the Israelites, and here we see Caleb with his allotment and fulfillment of the land. It says he's 85 years old. Okay? 85 years old, and he still hasn't lost his zeal and his enthusiasm for the Lord and his faith in God's power. In fact, it's believed that the Anakites were one of the most aggressive and strongest battling of the Canaanites. But Caleb doesn't care. What does he say? The Lord will help me drive them out, just as he said he would do. So Joshua grants him Hebron and the surrounding area, and we see that Caleb takes it with the help of the Lord. What a story of faith. What a story of faith. Oop. I may have clicked on too far here. Then let's. Uh-oh. Anyways, all right, we'll go real quick from my notes then. Okay, so we see in chapters 15 through 17, basically now we start to see the individual allotments of the tribe. So chapter 15 is the allotment for the tribe of Judah. Chapter 16 is the allotment for the tribe of Ephraim. And chapter 17 is the allotment for the tribe of Manasseh. We do see some complaints in that one from the tribe of Manasseh that says, oh, our land is too small, right? Joshua comes back and basically says, look, clear some forest and land and settle there. This is what God's allotted you, okay? Then we see a delay of the 7 tribes. And so there are 7 tribes that haven't settled yet. So we settled Judah, Ephraim, Manasseh. There's still 7 more. So in chapter 18, these other tribes, these 7, have been kind of complacent in going and taking their land like we saw Caleb and some of the others do. Instead, they're kind of okay being nomads. They want to bounce around, do some different things. But Joshua calls them together and chastises them. He basically says, why are you hesitating? Why are you hesitating? Go claim your land. And so they each select 3 men from each of the tribes, so you end up with 21 total. They go out into the land, they survey it, and they come back with reports. And then in the presence of the Lord, again, they cast lots. And we see that same process go on here. So Joshua had hoped that this renewed action of going out and surveying their land and him giving them a little bit of structure and guidance was going to help them to finally settle on the land, and it does work. But again, I think through our lives as Christians, right, there are some times, again, we can get comfortable or we can get complacent. And it's a challenge sometimes, excuse me, for us. And if we get in that habit, it becomes a hard challenge to break that habit and to put new habits in place, to supplement them that include building that relationship with God. Maybe it's spending time in Scripture or prayer every day. Maybe it's challenging ourselves to go out and think about the actions that we're doing differently. God yearns for us to be diligent in seeking out and doing His will, but He also promises us He's going to empower us in the same way we saw with Caleb, right? That He's going to help us as we deal with some of these challenges to stay there. So ultimately we see Joshua's plan works, and the remaining allotment of the land happens in chapters 18 and 19, including Joshua get his allotment of the land. He's a part of the tribe of Ephraim. And so in the latter half of chapter 19, Joshua also receives some land. Oh, there it is. All right, so the last part here is the cities of refuge. And so we see in chapter 20, Joshua sets up what was known as a city of refuge. Okay, and the concept here is that for those who accidentally kill someone, right, in the terminology we use today, it's manslaughter, right? Someone dies as a part of an act or an event, but was not intentional. And so apparently after shedding innocent blood, it was pretty common, I think, in this day where family members would want to chase down somebody and take vengeance. Joshua specifically sets up these cities of refuge, and there's 7, 3 on the west side of the Jordan and 3 on the east side, to give a place where if someone charged with manslaughter, they can flee to these cities. They speak to the elders at the gate, have to plead their case, but the elders are required to allow them into the city, and that city is responsible for protecting them until one of two things happens. Either they get a trial, and they're either found guilty or not guilty, which, again, could take time. Maybe they don't have the speedy trial that we do, and it's part of our Constitution. The Sixth Amendment, I think, is that. Or the high priest dies. And once the high priest dies, then they are free from their bondage here of protecting themselves, and also that they could be charged with a crime. And so it kind of gives 2 limitations here to basically give them a sentence of either you're here to your trial or you're here until the high priest dies. And that could be a lifetime, right? So it's important that this was also extended to the aliens, the people that were not Israelites. This also was part of that. So again, we see the aliens or the foreigners that the Israelites picked up along the way also afforded the same responsibilities, but also the same blessings that the people of Israel get. Okay, so the last part here we see in chapter 21, the Levites, again, this is the priestly tribe. They're given 48 towns and surrounding pasture land. They lived around the towns, but they don't own it. And again, we see the summarizing here, the fulfillment of God's promises to the Israelites. Okay? So I'll leave you with that. Again, a lot to take in here. It's a quick succession. The completion, though, of the conquering of the land and the fulfillment of God's promise. And then ultimately the challenge is now, what does normal life look like? How do we work together as a family? How do we think about not getting content and comfortable, but continue to have that connection of God and understanding the strength that He gives us as He works in our lives and as we seek to do His will. Okay, so we'll pick up next week and start to go through some of the challenges that happen here as the eastern tribes go home. All right, thank you. Have a great rest of the day.